900 years ere seed sown. Truth was twisted, its seeds were grown. Break the lies, spark the mission. Welcome to Quranic Inquisition.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Peace of the Lord to all of you. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste. Welcome to the show. So a few days ago, from the time of recording this, I had a show with Lloyd, and I decided to go with something a bit new format to see if the meaning of what I was trying to explain would work out. And it seemed to have gone very well. I think it explained very clear that the Quran tells a very different story to what we have been told. So I thought I would just use that same format to explain some of the things that we have done before here on the show, on the channel, and also to enhance some of these arguments. So with that in mind, we're going to be taking one topic at a time to show how the Quran tells one thing and how the tafsirs and the hadiths tells us something completely different. One topic at a time, but let's begin with exactly the same stuff that I showed at Lloyd, because I think it sets the stage very well. The topic of discussion now for the last couple of months or so, a bit more now, it's been whether Muhammad was a real person or not. Now, there are two camps. One describes, one accepts some of the hadiths and Sirah and say, well, that's him, because why would anybody write things like Al-Zud or Hassan or things like that? So some of those stories are true and some of them are false, but there was one guy walking around in Mecca saying, I have the final revelation, I am the last prophet, and so on. And then we have the other camp who thinks that all of that is pretty much made up and that Muhammad was most likely a character created by borrowing from stories of real people, but there wasn't one guy walking around giving this final revelation, or at least saying that he would do that. So in that camp, or in these two camps, one group thinks that Muhammad was a false prophet, and the other one that he was a fabricated prophet. The thing is, there is one thing that divides the two camps, and that is the stories. Because everything that we have heard about Muhammad, we didn't have CCTV cameras in the 7th century showing us this man walking around or anything of the sort. So all of the stories that we have heard about him, they come later. So the one thing that then we have to explore is exactly that, the stories. And then if the stories are fabricated, then he didn't exist. It would have been a story fabricated from many different sources. Or we cannot debunk the stories that we have read about him. And if that's the case, the story will stand as there was one guy walking around in Mecca saying these things. So with that in mind, we need a source. The source that we are going to be discussing here, which should surprise no one at this point, was from the right period, so written in the 7th century, in the correct region, so it was in the Middle East, it was in the right language, in Arabic, and I think we can conclude that it was produced en masse, so everybody knew about this source. And this source proves that the stories of Muhammad were in fact fabricated. And that source is the Quran. So this is what the Quran is like. We have two different layers, if you like. The bottom layer, this is what the text actually says. It says that Jesus died and he resurrected. It says that Jesus is God. It affirms the Trinity. And that bottom layer has no knowledge of a man called Muhammad walking around in Mecca. Those things are interpretations that we've heard so many times that we take them for granted, but those things are not in the text. For anyone who is aware that Muhammad, the name, only appears 4 times in the Quran, that should be already a huge red flag. Of course, another huge red flag is that such an important city like Mecca is only mentioned by name once. Of course, we will have people saying it also mentions Pekka and things like that. No, the name Mecca only appears once in the Quran. Those are huge red flags. When we look at the verses from Muhammad, 2 of them are in the past tense. And we have anyway unpacked lots of them with our brother John and in many other shows. So we will do that some other time, not today. The text tells us this story, something that is quite Christian. One can qualify that by saying they probably borrowed as well from Nestorians, Arians, Gnostics, and so on. But we're going to be focusing on the ones that they seem to have been borrowed from Christianity. So what is it that we read in the Quran? Do we read what is actually written? No. We read what we have been told those verses mean. And when we do that, Muhammad is everywhere. It's all about him. Jesus is not God. It denies the Trinity, and it also talks about itself, this book, as the final revelation. Now, those things are not in the text. They are interpretations. So with that in mind, let's start proving some stuff. Today, we're going to focus on the death and resurrection of Jesus in the Quran. Now, those things certainly shouldn't be there at all because Islam denies the death and resurrection of Jesus, but we're going to see that that's not the case, that the book tells us a very different story. And we begin with Surah 3, verse 55. So this verse here says, when Allah said, "Oh Jesus, indeed I will take you and raise you to myself," except that's not what it says. This word doesn't say in the Arabic, "I will take you," it means "I will cause you to die." Last year, Google translated that in that manner. This year, for some reason, it doesn't. It's almost like it's picking up from Daif International, which is quite interesting. But anyway, this is what it says. It acknowledges the death of Jesus. Not only that, when we actually carry on, it says those who follow Jesus will be superior to those who disbelieve until the day of resurrection. Now, if we just think about it for a second, we'll realize that this verse is taken from Christians. This is just what the text says. Of course, we have here our friend Daif International having to add something like this. When it says those who follow you, Jesus, in submission to Allah alone, he has to introduce that. Why? Because what the text says, those who follow Jesus. Now, when you go to the Tafsirs and you go to the Hadiths, you will get a very different story because remember, Islam has to deny the death and resurrection of Jesus. So what we will get is something like the Christians are not really following Jesus. They're following Paul. So when it says those who follow Jesus, it means those who follow Muhammad. Trust me, bro. It's absolutely insanity. This verse confirms the death of Jesus and also that the Christians are the good guys. We know where they took these verses from. Now, there is a little bit more to this, which is anyone who has discussed this verse with Muslims, they would have heard different stories. Like, for example, well, it's in the future tense. So that means that Jesus will return on the day of judgment, and then he fights the Antichrist, and then he dies, and then he's raised alive, and all of those things. Different Muslims will give different explanations. Remember, the Quran says very clearly that Jesus would die, and that those who follow him would be uppermost until the day of judgment. Therefore, that has to be concealed. You have to just keep throwing stories at it to make sure that people don't understand that this source was not about Muhammad walking around saying that he was the last prophet, saying that Jesus didn't die. Quite the contrary. So, and this is actually now, it should be quite well known. Now there is, for example, in here on this video, you can go to timestamp hour 3 minute 44 exactly, where we have David Wood and Giant Daughter of Christ, and someone asks this question, what is the meaning of that word? And they will explain it very clearly. I've also heard this from the Christian Prince, I think as well from Sam Shamon, but I think he heard it from the Christian Prince and so on. So this should be very, very well known. You can actually go and see this video. Actually, let me see if I can actually run it. I've never actually shared a video on the channel. Let me see if I can figure it out. Okay, I think hopefully it's going to work. Let's give this a shot.
To Jai&DoC, can you guys please break down Surah Imran's verse 55? I'm South Sudanese. The English translation is nonsense. Yeah, so you guys would you guys agree that the natural interpretation of that would be that Jesus died? Mutawafika?
Yeah, yeah, and you can also find commentaries to support that as well. So, but yeah, that's what you would get from just reading it. But the Muslims have to use a theological interpretation of that and twist it, not a linguistic interpretation.
So mutawaffika, the literal meaning is I will cause you to die. And even in Arabic now, if someone has been deceased, the word for deceased is al-mutawaffa.
Yeah, like you say, like tawaffa, so and so.
So we say mutawaffa, so and so has just been deceased. So that's exactly it. Cause to die.
Yeah, and if you since Muslims believe that when you fall asleep, Allah takes your soul away from your body and then He puts it back into you so you can wake up, and that they believe you can use mutawafika there because Allah's taking your soul away and stuff. You even have in Ibn Kathir when he's talking about 355, he says Allah must have put Jesus to sleep, taken his soul away and put him to sleep. Why? Because it says mutawafika, and the only other alternative would be he died. And Ibn Kathir doesn't want to grant that. So
yes. So
yeah.
Sorry, what you're mentioning is Surah 39, verse 42.
No. What?
Allah yatawaffa. Allah causes does the tawaffa thing to the souls when they sleep. And حين موتها, when they die, and for those souls who have not died when they sleep. But it's very strange for Allah to tell Jesus, I will cause you to sleep.
It has to be linked with sleep in some way. Like there's a if you're going to use tawaffa in any, like, to mean sleep, it's always linked with something like in sleep or at night, like some kind of reference to sleep. If it's just on its own, the natural meaning is death.
Yeah, isn't it weird? It's like, hey, and you're going to take a nap.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
what? Why?
Everybody sleeps every night, so it's not a promise from Allah that he'll sleep. It's a promise that He will cause him to die.
So yeah,
You understand what we're trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay, so well, there you have it. That's actually what it means, and they also explain how they don't want to actually grant the meaning of the word because that contradicts Islam. So we know that there is more to this story. It also feels like when Christian apologists see problems in the Quran, they normally just contradict each other in the sense of Muhammad didn't know what he was saying. But in this case, it actually contradicts Islam. So I've heard Christian apologists mentioning this verse and others that we're going to look at, but they normally move away from this one very quickly, or at least that's my reading of the situation, because it's not possible for Muhammad to go and say these words and then trying to clarify it. It's like, why would he say these words? He simply wouldn't. It actually contradicts everything that we have been told about the man. So anyway, continuing with this theme, this says something that Muhammad would never have said, and it says clearly that those who follow Jesus, who happens to die, would be the uppermost until the day of judgment. These verses were taken from the Christians. It has nothing to do with Muhammad saying to people that Jesus fell asleep and those who follow Muhammad is like following Jesus or anything of the sort. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so bottom layer, what does the Quran say? The surah says that Jesus would die, and those who follow him, the Christians, would be uppermost until the day of judgment. Let's not go into, oh, well, it doesn't say Christians. It's like, yeah, well, the Quran says Nasara, and nobody actually knows the meaning of that word. It seems to appear for the first time in the Quran. So let's not get there. Those who follow Jesus would be the Christians. And I will show a map probably on the next session. That region had been Christianized. The region of the Middle East, Arabia, had been Christianized. So say those who follow Jesus, everybody would have understood that it was the Christians, because at that point they were in control of every area from Portugal and North Africa all the way up to the Middle East. So they were very, very big. So there wouldn't be, oh no, but they are not doing it right. Everybody would have understood that those are the people following Jesus. They were called Christians for a reason. So, but what does Islam say? Either that Jesus fell asleep or something like that, and that Christians are not following Jesus right. They have to deny what the book very clearly says in the very clear Arabic. Right, next verse. Simple. This puts words in the mouth of Jesus. Peace is on me the day I was born, the day I die, the day I'm raised alive. Okay, birth, death, resurrection should be game over. It's just as simple. Now, when you go to the Tafsir, I think there is one I will show. Yeah, I will show one in a little bit. They will have again explanations as to what does it mean the day that he dies. And there will be things like when he comes back on the day of judgment and things like that. Absolutely not. There will be other explanations from people. Oh, well, the same thing appears about John in the same chapter. This is Surah 19, verse 33. So I think it's Surah 19, verse 15, when it's meant to be God speaking about John, saying, peace is on him the day he was born, the day he dies, the day he's raised alive. So Muslims point at that and says, you see, it's not unique about Jesus. But I want you to think about this for a second. Don't you find it a little bit odd that this expression only appears twice in the Quran, just a handful of verses apart? First, or well, this one is the second one, is about Jesus speaking in the first person, and the only other time when it appears is associated with John in the third person. It does feel like those words were meant to be put in the mouth of John, saying, basically preparing the way of the Messiah. Out of the whole shebang of people there in the Quran, the only two places where this appears happens to be Surah Miriam and about Jesus in the first person, and about John from God speaking about him in the third person. It doesn't make any sense. It does feel like they have played with that. And by the way, we're working on that verse. And at this point, my gut feeling is those were meant to be words spoken by John as though he's preparing the way for the Messiah. So, Surah 1933, it acknowledges Jesus' death and resurrection. In Islam, Jesus will die when he returns and fights the Antichrist and whatever. Those things are not there. Muhammad would never have said those words, then hoping that people will understand something else. And we will go through a tafsir in a minute. But he wouldn't say these words. It would just create confusion. Why would you create confusion? Why would you say these words about Jesus when everybody in that region would have understood them immediately as death and resurrection? So now we have two places where the Quran says something that Muhammad would not have said. And this is the third one. So Surah 5, verse 117. In here, we have that word again. When it comes to Jesus, how do they translate it? When you took me up. So this is Jesus speaking with Allah. Let's actually just read it real quick. I said not to them except what you commanded me, to worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. And I was a witness over them as long as I was among them. But when you took me up, you were the observer over them, and you are over all things witness. So this is Jesus speaking with the Father. This is how people would have understood that when it was first narrated. When we look at this word, what happens? Well, magic, because that verb means to pass away, to die. And when we look, it looks like that's the case in every single case. It means that. Two exceptions, this according to Corpus Quran, of course, is down there. So comes to them, and then this one, you raise me. But when we look at that one in more detail, we see that it is, yes, the translator being basically a little bit funny. It comes to them death. So it's about dying. So in every single instance, it's saying that this means to die. But when it's about Jesus, it cannot be dying, because that contradicts Islam and we cannot have that. Who cares about what the book says? We have to go with what your imams and sheikhs have said. The book clearly says that he dies. In fact, it is in the past tense. So now we have the two previous verses talking in future tense, and this one in the past tense, which is interesting. It sounds like the previous two, they are putting the words on Jesus and Allah before the crucifixion, and this one is after the crucifixion, which is quite interesting. So for those people who say, no, he will die when he comes back on the day of judgment, is, well, we have a verse here that he's saying, using that word in the past tense. So yet another lie and excuse that we're very happy to debunk. So what do we have? Surah 5 verse 117, Jesus died. And it sounds like this is telling the story after the crucifixion, once he is going up to the heavens and speaking with the Father. And we will actually delve into this one in a future show in more detail, because there is a lot to unpack at the end of Surah 5. So make sure that you like the stream, subscribe, click the notifications button so that you know when we actually unpack the end of Surah 5 in detail. We're going to bring this back up and we're going to talk about the spirit, and we're going to talk about quite a few things. Very, very cool. So back to the show. So Islam says that Jesus fell asleep or whatever, because once again, they cannot say that Jesus died because that contradicts Islam. Who cares what the Quran is saying when it's more important for you to push a narrative? Am I right? And let's continue. So we're pretty much at the end. These are the 3 verses that very clearly say that Jesus died. There are a number of verses where it is pretty much implied, but it requires a lot of analysis. So for now, we can go with these ones. They are very basic and everybody can see what it says. Now, then there is this one verse, which every Muslim will tell a million times, because it's the one that they point at to say, you see, Jesus never died. Surah 4, verse 157. And they're saying, indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary. It's like, okay. This is what they point at to say that Jesus didn't die. Isn't it interesting that they don't point at the others that say that he did die? They are telling them that the other ones mean that he fell asleep, and that this one that he didn't die. But that's actually not the case at all. The other verses say that Jesus died. This one says that they didn't kill him. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, this is just from the Bible. If we actually read that through the lens of the Bible, we see from John 10, Jesus saying, no one takes it, my life, from the previous verse, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up, to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. So, according to Jesus, can they kill him? Can they take his life from him? No. He can lay it down. And this is actually what we have here. That's why we have the verses that say that he did die, and that's compatible with Christianity. It's like, yeah, he did die. And also one of the verses that say that he resurrected. And then this one, which says nobody can take his life, nobody could kill him, but he could lay it down. So they don't contradict. There is no contradiction at all. All right, so this is just it. The verse is about Jesus dying according to the Quran, and how we are told different stories in order to build the story of Muhammad walking around and saying things. And these verses are things that that man, according to the stories we've heard, he would never have said any of that. So let's see, quick summary. So we have in those 2 surahs, it's talking that it's saying that Jesus will die in the future. In 5117, it says that he died in the past. So that will mean the ones in the future, they are spoken before the crucifixion, and Surah 517 is post-crucifixion. Also in Surah 1933, it says that Jesus would resurrect. And then we have, and those who follow him will be uppermost, which everybody would have known is about Christianity. Of course, that is the bottom layer, that is what the Quran says, but what is it that we read? What does Islam actually say? That it doesn't mean that. Everything is different. They have to change the meaning of everything, because otherwise, they don't have a religion. It is built upon Jesus not dying. And when we look at the Quran, he died. So hopefully this very, very brief summary makes sense, because those are very key words in the Quran, and we can at least start to see how they are changing the meaning when we get to the Tafsir. So what are we going to do next time and in future shows? We're going to, I forgot to mention, there was this Tafsir from the verse that says, Peace is on me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I'm raised alive. So let's see what this Tafsir says. This is his affirmation, Jesus, that he is a worshipper of Allah, the mighty and sublime, and that he is a creature created by Allah. He, Isa, will live, die, and be resurrected, just like the other creature that Allah has created. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So you see, they're taking one verse and they're saying, ignore the death and resurrection on Surah 19, verse 33. Ignore that because we don't like those words from God. But they don't actually then they don't take this in conjunction with the one where Jesus is saying that he already died in the past and he's talking with God. I haven't actually checked that other tafsir, but I honestly don't care about tafsirs that much because I can see that all that they do is try to write a narrative on top of the book. And what we're trying to do is remove that narrative and see what the book says. So what we're going to do next time is we're going to have a look at verses that are sus, just sus. There will be quite a few. There will be quite a few other topics that we want to cover, including the verses that say that Jesus is the creator, that Jesus is God, that confirms the Trinity, that confirms the Holy Spirit. The Quran is absolutely full of those things. So make sure that you have clicked the notifications button, and then you will see when we're going to talk about the next one. The next one are going to be just verses that stick out like a sore thumb, and they will be fun. I've discussed them a number of times on the channel, but this time I will follow this new format. With regards to this new format, so people who are familiar with what we do here on the channel realize that it's difficult stuff because it is very difficult. The Quran is almost like a shuffled deck of cards. Everything is all over the place. We have to try to find the correct order of the verses, and they are hiding so much stuff in there, which is very difficult. So what then is difficult is to explain that in a way that it is nice and simple. I hope that this new format showing what the Quran says and then what the interpretation of Islam is and how they are very different, I hope that will make things clear for you guys at home. Please let me know if you have any other ideas as to how we can present these very difficult topics in ways that are very easy and straightforward so that people may understand better. Please let us know. We are always open for advice, criticism, and any ideas that can actually help us move these things forward and show people what happened 1400 years ago. So I think that's it from me for today. I hope that you have enjoyed this show. Let me know what you think about this new format. Any other comments, suggestions, anything else that you've noticed in the Quran that you think we need to investigate as soon as possible, please let us know. And that's it from me. I hope you have enjoyed the show. I hope you have a nice week ahead, and we will see you soon. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
There is only one Quran, right? Every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie! 26 different Qurans!
There are 0 Dawa guys apparently left on the planet who are willing to defend Muhammad in a debate.
Everybody can go and read it. This is a book full of mistakes in Arabic, in the grammar, in the spelling, in the pronunciation.
Whoever wrote the Quran made an error because they didn't quite understand what was written in the 7th century in the Torah and the Injil.
As promised, I will give you more than 20 reasons why I left Islam in this video.
We know that stories about Muhammad were made up on an industrial scale.
What in the world is this Injil?